back to our final session of BODW 2022. This is Mishi Lee. Up next, we'll be having a roundtable discussion on transformative design for good. Joining our roundtable will be Dr. Peter Yorde, Professor at Open Innovation of NHL Stendon University of Applied Sciences, Paul Priestman, Chairman and Creative Director of Pulley Innovations Shanghai, and Thomas Wittershofen, Co-founder, Designer and Director at Tonic. Our moderator will be Ms. Shirley Surya, the Curator for Design and Architecture at M+, Hong Kong's Museum for Visual Culture. Without further ado, please welcome Ms. Surya.
So welcome to the very last panel of BODW 2022. We started off with a roundtable discussion on the first night, and then now we're ending with one. So whoever is still online and here, thank you for your persistence and attentiveness. I just wanted to address that this panel title, which is like Transformative Design for Good, is something that you could either kind of take it as like a given. Like that's I'm clear, I know what it means, but I think what I'm interested in this panel discussion is that, especially with these very heavyweights in design with over 30, 40 years of experience with, you know, transport design, industrial design engineering, as well as communication design, I really wanted to get at the idea of what it means by transformative, and also the idea of like, what is this thing called good, right? And so in some ways, so I will address these questions after Peter, who had not had a chance to share about his work and practice with us the past few days. After this presentation, we'll dwell into those questions. So for now, would someone be able to share Peter's presentation?
Okay. Thanks a lot, Shirley, for allowing me the stage. It's wonderful to be here. I'm part of the Dutch delegation that is visiting this week, also as a preparation for next year. And it's great to represent the Netherlands, of course, although it's also a little bit difficult because if you represent your country, you have to stick to certain standards. So the consul is here, and he kind of prepared me and said, Peter, you're not allowed to talk about politics, and you're not allowed to talk about religion. And I'm like, yeah, but if we talk about transformative design for good, this is really, we need to talk about these issues. And he said, no, please avoid it. So I'll try to avoid it, but you'll find out that it's almost impossible to avoid these kind of issues when you talk about good and bad. And I'll start also with some projects that help me to understand a little bit the transformative design approach. In the Netherlands, we talk a lot about transitional design, so making transitions from the current situation to a future situation. And to be honest, I'll start with two failed projects. And we've heard really a lot of successes this week, and it was really inspiring. But personally, I also learned a lot of my failures. And I'll start with the first slide. It's a project I did. It's about 20 years ago with Nike European headquarters in the Netherlands. And we said, we'll work on the transport of the future. And it was quite a big project, and it was about transition to the future. We worked with employees of Nike, and we tested new vehicles. We designed them, and we had services, and we even worked on infrastructure. And this was really a big, ambitious project. I worked at that moment at the Contract Research Organization, and TNO it's called, and this is me on the right when I was still young and beautiful with the Dutch Queen at that moment. And this is the current Dutch king. They all looked at it, and I thought, this is going to be a change in mobility. We had a lot of publicity, and at the end, the question is, what was really realized? What was the result that actually was on the market? And I will count back to 3, 2, 1, and this was it. And then it's like, this was a little bit disappointing because it's almost a regular bike, you know. I mean, there were several thousand sold, and okay, it was good for the company, but this was not what we envisioned. So I felt a little bit like a failure. But then I thought perhaps it's just us, we did it wrong. But then there's another project that I learned from, and it was from actually the first Dutch astronaut. His name is Wubbe Ockels. And he is the first Dutch astronaut, and he's also, he became a professor at Delft University of Technology. And he said, I will work on the future of transportation. And he, this is him several years later when he was a professor, and he worked on this wonderful concept called the superbus. And this superbus, it was really several million spent on it. I'm not sure if it was 10 million or more, but a lot of money. And there was new batteries, all kind of visionary technology, and it really looked great. But there was one slight minor problem with it, and the problem was it was not allowed to drive on the road. So it was never actually implemented. And then, of course, they started to create new infrastructure specially made for this vehicle, but it never was realized. And these lessons helped me to create a sort of model for designers that I call the multi-level design model. And that and it actually means that as designers, we have to work on different levels of society. And often we work on what I call the product technology level. I have an industrial design background, so that's a physical artifact that you can drop on your toes, but it can also be an app, but it's like small and tangible. And that, of course, I can talk for hours about it, well, be fast. It's part of a bigger service system, a business model, but that is also part of like a socio-technical system where it should fit. Like if we have an electric vehicle, but we cannot charge the vehicle, it will not work. And that, and here I come to the last issue of the societal parts, it is part of like, how do you look to the world? What is good? What is bad? It is easy to solve all traffic problems if you just make the tax on vehicles so high nobody can afford them, so you have to go with public transport. But that has to do with your vision on society. Do you say, no, we are allowed to have individual vehicles because that's our right? Or do you say, no, we should just put everybody in public transport? And just one last example of two students of me, it was during COVID and it was an online session. And we had one student was in Brazil and the other one was in Singapore. And the student in Brazil, she worked on congestion and they have a lot of traffic jams and everybody has 2 or 3 cars. And then the student in Singapore said, wow, we solved this already, you know, it's very easy. And then the student in Brazil said, oh, how did you do that? And the student in Singapore explained how they do it. It's like super expensive and it's like regulations. But then the student in Brazil said, ha, 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 if we would do it here, nobody would accept it. We would riot on the street because we need our car. So there's the politics which influence design solutions.
Yes.
Okay.
So I just want to, we didn't get to know what Peter is going to say, of course, until now, but I think that was a great starter because you brought up the idea that this idea of transformative design is not something to do with just the role of what the designer or the design can do, but it's something other aspects, right? It's got to do with the mindset change, either of not just the designer, the producer, the manufacturer, or the politics, or even the people who are using it, or the market.
Definitely.
So it's that sort of like value system, right, or the way of life.
That's it.
So I think you pointed out even the whole context of Brazil versus Singapore. It's got to do with like, the idea of like obedience is a very different thing within different countries or different cultural contexts that enables a system to even function or operate. So I think my question is, of course, in relation to what you presented, which could, be good to hear each of you address it, is that how do you cultivate this change of mindset, right? Because we know that the physical product, space, graphic, is not going to operate on its own. It has to have effect only within a certain kind of understanding, perhaps, or even way of things operating. So what is the role of the designer, or in cultivating that change, or what is the change that you yourself have to have, a clarity of to make that change, right? So it's either external that you observe, or the kind of change that is within that you think will enable this transformative design. So
yeah, well, on that respect, I do think that design has a very specific role it can have. So if you make it really complex, then all the disciplines, of course, have to work together to get to the next step. But what I liked, for instance, from One Byte, the presentation of Sarah, is that you see that if people work together on a design, then they get into a different mindset. And then they are willing to cooperate because something is coming out that is designed, which has a sort of beauty or a sort of creativity or a sort of that it comes together in a new idea. And then you see that the mindset of people is totally different from when they do politics. Because then they start battling each other, or when they do economics, because then they start, having competition. But when they when they're able to design together, it sort of makes a mindset that gets the best out of human beings. And that is also the role of design. Of course, on the one hand, we have a limited role of design. As Sir Paul said, that in the new mobility, talking about batteries changing, etc., and sharing taxis, and then in the end, Paul said, yeah, so somebody asked, well, what's the role of the designer? I said, well, he can make a sort of division in the taxi that you sit apart. That's too small. I think what has been called design thinking is actually the wrong idea, because design thinking is about solving it, but it should be a design mentality and a design structure where you work together on designs, and then you get a totally different mindset, and then you can really find shared common goals.
Yeah. So may I just try to interpret that a lot of things that you said there? So it seems as though as much as, it's really about designing the process, right? As much as it is the outcome that enables a change.
Exactly, but
right?
if you focus together on the outcome, you get a different mindset in the people collaborating.
As in different, what do you mean by a different idea about the outcome?
It should not be a compromise. A design is not a compromise. A design is something that transcends that. That is more beautiful or better or stronger. So then if you work on that level and you work together on that, then people get the best out of themselves.
Right.
And then they can step over their egos, and then they work on what is there. And that's what I saw in Sarah's work. Because they really collaborate on color choice. Yeah. And how many wars can you have on color? A lot. Yeah. But if you work together with a design mentality, you find really nice colors that fit for everybody.
Yeah. So it's basically designing a process with an outcome that has this kind of a clear goal between the users and the designers. That sort of a process.
Yeah. But also working together on something beautiful.
Yeah, but it can, the designer can have different roles. It's just that you have to know which role to take. Because if you are the designers which are more in the art, sometimes they use like provocative design to create a design which is so extreme that everybody says, no, this is not what we want. I mean, we had students and they were at an art school, and they actually, because the Netherlands has quite a problem with drugs being produced and sold. But they said, well, let's make it into a business model. And they had like a school for drugs, how to produce your drugs and sell them. But it was like a fake school. So they had a whole curriculum, like how to avoid the police and how to be illegal without being caught. And they kind of presented it as a course. And of course, this is not what we want, but this can be a role of design, like, ho, this is not what, I mean, so the designer can have different roles in addressing, it's not only about functional solutions,
right.
I think.
So you brought up an example that is, of course, on a speculative level, right? So by speculating a scenario, you actually almost imagine the consequence that you don't want, or you want.
Definitely.
Right? And then from there, you help in the decision-making process. So
definitely.
This is, I'm just like really trying to get this out. So Paul in. Yeah.
I think going back to the original question and failure, I think there are a number of things that design can really make a difference. And the world that I work in is very large, long-term projects, designing trains, aeroplanes, maybe even spaceships. And I think the role of design in that particular arena, where you're thinking of maybe 10 years ahead, is you first have to understand, and then it's working with teams. But what design does, it can bring together those teams to a single vision. And my experience of working with some of the top people, the CEOs of these companies, is you have to get them to understand the single vision. And design has that power. And I've been in the position where I've designed something or led the team, and we've produced designs. And it has to be so understandable. It can't be like, I'm a designer, I like blue, so it's blue. You can't do that. It has to be something which is embedded in the culture. And I think it's really interesting when the CEO starts to say, it's our design, it's my design, then you know you've done it. But you have to have this very strong single vision to lead maybe thousands of people in a single project to believe in one direction. And that is a very important part of design. So design leadership and instilling a common goal. And that's where I think you see success. Because design by itself is nothing. Yep. It's engineering, it's science, it's advertising, it's communication. But it's that single vision and having to think that far ahead. And that's the difficult job for designers, to have that vision for 10 years.
Yeah.
Well, and what also is interesting, I think, is that the vision doesn't need to be successful in itself. Because often I think designers can create a vision of the future and make it like to visualize and to interpret it in such a way that people start realizing that a different future is possible. And I explained, of course, those projects as failures, but they're not failures because we learned so much from it. And often you have small projects that are not super commercially successful, but they show the way to go, and they prove that it's possible. And in the Netherlands, we focus a lot on circularity. And to get the whole country circular, that's really big. I mean, it's a big challenge. But if you have small projects that show how it can be done, like living labs, field labs, niche experiments, then the designer can say, look, it's possible, so don't say as an excuse, it's not possible, it's too difficult. And then you can try to expand that and enlarge that to make it, of course, accepted on a large scale.
So we're just trying to capture the point that Paul brought up and what you brought up. So just from you is really more about this importance of multi-scalar kind of testing, iterative, that change or what could be effective does not always need to be large scale, even though we always talk about system and the importance of it, but that could also happen and occur at many different sort of like levels, right? So, and we should not deny that, it can only be successful up to here and it's okay. And you actually help.
We need to learn, and I think design is also about learning, and a lot of the technologies that are used in transport, but the point is with technology, you can learn it in a lab. It's like, it's predictable. The problem with humans is they don't stick to the rules. You think
so bring them to the table.
Yeah.
So bring them to the table.
The humans.
But then with a design mindset, so that they don't fall apart, but they work together on exactly what you say. If the client says, "I have a feeling I made it," then you're really ahead. Yeah. Then you have ambassadors that will really bring it further. So and that is a design technique, because it is in the design mindset to come up together or on your own or together, doesn't matter, but with something that is good, that is working, that is for the better, that is for everybody, that has a certain beauty to it. So, and that is why that's also a role for design.
Yes. Thank you. We are this idea about like designers are naturally optimist, right?
Yeah, that was mentioned.
Right. It's kind of like you can't escape that, right? So this whole optimism, kind of like what you said, this vision. So we were already having this discussion at the back just now. Yeah. This discussion already started, and the most contentious one is not contentious, but basically the issue of like, what is good? Do we really have a common vision? We are this day and age where it's supposedly very diverse, we have very different ideas about what is good, but there's no absolute, perhaps, but at the same time, there are all these words that we keep using these days, right? So whether it's inclusive, diverse, sustainable, so I'm just trying to get at, basically, can we really work towards such common grounds? Or in a way that, without being kind of politically correct, or even morally policing. Can we do that? Because in a way, it's good to have these values in mind about what is good and working towards this kind of common goal. But at the same time, how do we also allow for, I guess, slight differences in defining those terms? I just wanted to, this is a really broad question. Again, it gets into philosophical, but I'm really curious about how do you even start creating this vision?
Yeah, if you take the word good and then you talk about design and good, design is made up of tiny little elements. So if you go into an aircraft interior or a train interior, there are thousands of little details, each considered, and each detail has to be perfect. But when someone first goes into that environment, they're not designers, but they feel and they say, I like this. This is nice. This is good. So it is the skill of the designer to bring all of those thousands of elements together to create a human environment that is culturally correct, which is the other really complicated thing of understanding. Because perhaps my opinion I'm not designing for myself. I'm designing for someone that's older, someone that's younger, in a different part of the world, and so you have to understand. In designing trains for Australia, we're not designing bike racks. We're designing racks for surfboards. And in China, then, of course, we're having dispensers for hot water and boiling water in each car. So you have to understand. And so, again, it's coming back to these multifaceted elements, and that's the complicated thing. And thinking so far ahead, because we mentioned technology earlier, when you're designing 10 years ahead, that technology will have changed. So you cannot design. So you have to design for modularity. You have to design for upgradability. And all of those elements. And that's what makes a design good or a product good, is that it has a long lifespan and it's environmentally correct.
Yeah, for me, I would say that you have to bring in the young generation much more. The young people at this moment are really value-driven. So how close can you get to what is good if you're value-driven? You know what I mean? So
can you elaborate value-driven?
Well, so
in your
good is not that it works, but good is that it feels good for humankind, for the earth, for us, for all of us, for everybody involved. If you take, for instance, drugs, I didn't know the project, but I'm totally intrigued by it, because obviously people need drugs. We have always used drugs to change our minds. Wouldn't it be great if we sat together and made one that was not addictive and would not destroy your body? Because I think we would all really easily agree on that was not totally ideal. And of course, then we can also make a system where we don't get into criminal situations with the same fun of the drugs. So a lot of things.
See, this is a Dutch conversation, eh? Amsterdam on board.
I didn't know the example.
In the right direction.
But I'm immediately struck by it. The example, what I'm trying to say is, if you bring people together in generations, in disciplines, because everything's complex, so you have to work together in disciplines, but you also have to work together in cultures and in generations. And then you get on the table what is good. And then you design it. And if you do that with a design mindset instead of a political mindset, as I was saying earlier, then I think you're a step ahead.
Yeah. But and even on a functional level, it's not so easy, because what we call the rebound effect, if you, for instance, we found out if we can prevent people from traveling, so they work at home and they don't need to work at the office. And then we think we save kilometers, you know, but then there's a rebound effect that people start traveling in the weekend extra because they kind of need that travel. And there's of course lots of examples of lights being more energy efficient, which you think saves energy, but the result is that just everybody puts everywhere lamps because, it's so energy efficient anyway. So the problem is that we humans always find a way to kind of use great inventions in a way that is not super great sometimes, where we come back, of course, to the whole value discussion again.
Yeah. So yeah, I think this is just a lot, but I want to get at the idea of, like, you know, whether it's about multiple generations, but getting at very different cultural contexts. I guess, you know, this is not the Dutch discussion, and this whole thing is very particular to you guys, but, you know, it's good for us to know and understand. But I'm also curious about your own projects, right? Having worked in China for, I guess, both Tonic and for Paul. So what, I guess, you know, you can also share about your students in Brazil versus Singapore. But yeah, what just any example that you think was most kind of like, wow, that was a major learning point in kind of like distinguishing or discerning differences, in which the idea of inclusivity, for example, which could be something perhaps universal today that is considered so-called good, could mean very different things from in different contexts. I'm just giving an example. What would that be for you?
Do you want to? Well, I mean, difficult question. I think again, I mean, going back to the learning of past experience. I mean, some of the technologies that I think are involved in mass transit and public transport is one of my great passions. And you know, some of the innovations in suspended monorails, for instance, which are less disruptive to cities and cause less disruption when they're being built, I think are some innovations which are really interesting. And from that, and how we can design a vehicle which is in effect hanging rather than on wheels, is a really interesting opportunity, because of course you can have glass floors or the windows that go right down to the floor to give another experience. Because I do think that to encourage people to take public transport and not the car, I think it is a design issue. And that is where design, I think, can really make things better and good. Because I don't think you can necessarily tell people to change their mode of transport. It's got to be something which is actually physically better. And we've seen this in cities where traffic gets to the point where it's just not worthwhile using the roads. And then through design, then you can use other means of transport. So again, I think this is where design has a real power to make people change their attitude and way of life.
Can you bring a kind of elaborate on a geographical example of that sort of differences in scenario?
Cross-cultural.
Not necessarily. You know, just it could.
I mean, the suspended monorail we've been working is in Wuhan, in China, and you know, this is a big development in trying to reduce traffic congestion in that particular part of the world.
So if that was to work, let's say, and okay, this is not okay, Bangkok is not suspended per se, but
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, I mean, are these models something that you think could be replicated easily across different cities, or?
Yes, they are. I mean, you can. I mean, basically, it's a rail which instead of sitting on top of the rail, it hangs from it, and you can build these quite easily, sort of these structures down the centre of highways, and it frees up the congested ground level and allows free transport within cities.
And that only worked in that city.
No, it's being rolled out throughout many cities. It's not a new technology, but it's one that with the new advancements in.
So it wasn't difficult to get everybody on board in kind of like implementing this.
It's an example of what can be done, and it seems to be rolling out now. So, yeah.
Yeah, perhaps it's interesting to think about biking, because that's, of course, a Dutch subject too. We like bikes. And I notice Hong Kong doesn't have a lot of bikes. Amsterdam has a lot of bikes, and we also have some cities that are especially built for bikes. So if you take the bike from one place to another, it takes 10 minutes. If you take the car, it takes like half an hour, because you have to go all the way around.
Amsterdam.
But what is fascinating is Paris used to be a totally like an enemy of biking. It's like you kill yourself if you take the bike there. However, Corona totally changed that. Because in the Corona times, people didn't want to go with public transport, and cars is just impossible in Paris. And they made this city totally bike-friendly. If you go there now, it's all bike lanes. And even people respect it, you know. You can drive on the taxi lanes, the bus lanes. They have all kind of rental systems. And this is a crisis that has made people change their behavior in a, I think, very positive way, because now, if you ever go to Paris, take a bike, it is really a wonderful experience. You're like, oh, this is the Notre Dame, and it's like, so sometimes you need a big crisis to make a change that nobody thought could ever happen.
Yeah.
And there's also a design issue, of course, how you create the cities, if they're like bike-friendly Amsterdam, or just don't take the car there, because you get stuck. But take a bike and you'll be perfect.
So the moment you go abroad, you start learning. But you also learn not only about other cultures, but also about your own culture. And that is so important to get to a next level. And that you decentrate in a way that you get. Of course, you have to keep close to your feelings, but you can also detach from them a bit and see if you can find a common ground with something that is new. And the nice thing is, if it's cultural, then it opens you up. So at the moment, we have quite a bit of migration in Europe, and that closes people down, and people get really afraid that they will lose their culture. But on the other hand, if you go abroad, then you open up. And then you learn from yourself, about yourself and about other people. And then you find what is typical for you and what is important for yourself and also for the other person. And then, of course, in communication, this is really important. So you have a mutual way of interest in each other, curiosity. And that's also a very typical design attitude that can bring things better, further.
Yeah. Just really relating, right? And the ability to relate.
Yeah, but, and also to the quirkiness of yourself, you know?
Yeah. So I love this whole crisis thing, and how crisis moves people, changes things.
Isn't there a Chinese sign that is like crisis, but it's also like opportunity?
Yeah, the word 危机, yes, that's kind of together. I think often people use that word. But I think, so I'm just don't mind looking at the time, but really I wanted to understand about your personal journey through this 3 years of crisis, and how have you been able to kind of have a change in your own mindset about what good is? I mean, that's different from before, just through what happened in the last 2-3 years.
Yeah. I mean, picking up on what Peter was saying, I do think that cities have changed, and the cycling and walking has become sort of mainstream if you look at what's happened in New York, Paris, London, and many cities. And I really love the fact that restaurants in many cities have sort of reclaim the parking space outside their shop or restaurant, and it's become seating for more restaurants. And it's almost like people have reclaimed the streets in some respects. And it's all to do with enjoyment. I think that this is a really wonderful change. And then with technology of the massive growth in e-scooters and lightweight electric vehicles, and I spoke about this on Wednesday night, these sort of hybrid pedal electric with batteries for first and last mile deliveries. And you can see in so many cities around the world now that this is becoming mainstream. And obviously saving the emissions and making cities better. One of the things that I've been working on for many years is what's the rush? I've been involved in designing sort of fastest things on the planet. What is the rush? If you can work as you travel, then why can't that become your workspace? Take the slow road, enjoy the moment. And it's all about living and enjoying. And I think that's one of the things I've seen which is great in cities, is that people are actually walking and cycling and enjoying being in the city, and in a cleaner city as well. Yeah.
Oh, this is such a desirable change of idea of what speed means in our lives, and the idea of being able to appreciate rest, right, and not having to, just rush. That itself is a really a mindset change that, through crisis only you realize and treasure. Yeah. So that's great. But yeah, we're just curious about all these observations that may or may not inform your design approach, but I'm just curious. Yeah. What would it?
Well, I think personally, I'm quite shocked about what happened the last few years, and it does feel like as if we're tumbling from crisis into crisis, so that there is no moment to reflect on the COVID, which at least in our country is now sort of under control, which is great. We really enjoy it, and of course the rest of the world will reach that stage soon, I'm sure. But we're tumbling from crisis into crisis. So I think it's disturbing times. And on the other hand, as you say, designers are optimists, and I am. I cannot help it. So, but sometimes I get a feeling that my brain is split or something. That I have a very worrying brain and I have a very optimistic brain. And sometimes I dwell in the one, and sometimes I dwell in the other. And so, if I'm saying that people should collaborate, I think my brain should collaborate a bit more at the moment. From where are we at? Because I see also conversations go from really optimistic and positive within minutes into really negative, and then back again. So I think at least let me speak for myself. My emotions are up and down quite a bit. And what's the rush? Something like that, something like a moment of rest, a moment of reflection, I think would do me really well, and I think for a lot of people.
Yeah, if you think about what the Corona brought, on the one hand, it has brought people sometimes together because they are in contact in a long distance. But for me, what we found is that in the first months we thought it was okay, but after 1 or 2 years, what you really miss is the personal contact. And what then happens if you live in a digital world, it looks like you are in contact with others, but you're in contact with a very small group of select people that only speak your language, like language in the way of your values, your ideas, which creates like clusters of people that don't communicate with each other. And this creates a lot of problems, of course. And I think when you meet people on Twitter, it's always like hate and conflict. But if you meet the same person in real life, this is a nice person, you know. Perhaps you don't agree. Of course, that can happen. But you can still have a nice conversation. And personally, I think the value of meeting other people and also other cultures, and the fact that we as Dutch can now visit Hong Kong instead of just being online, that is for me really, you realize the value of meeting real people in real life. And of course, the virtual part, it's great and it has opened opportunities, but nothing beats a real meeting, a real handshake, a beer on the terrace afterwards. So that, and the same for our students, you know. We need to really get them in the room together and not virtual online. So that was for me the most important lesson, that the value of, there's even a Dutch word, it's called huidhonger. And that means like people are hungry to be touched by a real person again, because there was a time that we were not, yes, we hug, it was a time that we were not allowed to touch anybody.
Yeah.
And people, especially single people, elderly people, they were like, nobody touches me anymore. So we need physical contact. That's, we are human beings, we're not machines.
I know we are just as glad here in Hong Kong, to finally have physical speakers and guests. So.
I noticed people in Hong Kong, they say, we are so happy to have people visiting us again. And we are happy that we are able to visit again.
Yeah, but it seems like, just from hearing you guys, it's like, it's such a, this idea of like, as much as there's this skepticism about a single value of a single idea of what's good, things are still quite gray, but there are these fundamentals, like whether it's about conviviality, like human interactivity and relatability, and just this kind of like the importance of the tangible and the physical presence, that is kind of hard to substitute. I find that sort of like value system needs to be almost like brought to the core.
But there is perhaps no good or bad. Well, there is some aspects, of course, but it's good at least to understand the other's perspective of good and bad and value, because if we are all in our own silo, we think we are the only one. Well, one example, I just found out that in Hong Kong, you marry in a red dress. And I've always thought that on all of the earth, everybody marries in a white dress, because that's how my... but now I only realize that, it's not everywhere the same. And that's like I'm 55 and a lesson learned for me today.
Right.
So
well, that's like the difference about cultural manifestation, that's very different things. But I think the value of like relatability, I think that's kind of like almost I felt like we need to get back to that core. The ability to observe changes, but at the same time also see that amongst these evolution within societies, that there are still these fundamental threats that we should treasure, that we should almost like cultivate, because they are often, I guess, could easily be taken for granted or dismissed. I think it's something that I felt, that designers need to kind of hold those values close, as opposed to being kind of overrun by other agendas that may be, purely economic or whatever that is, So it's that's kind of my thoughts about these things. But I just wanted to, it's 3 minutes left, but just to open up to anyone to be part of this roundtable discussion, and any questions that you guys have, or any other final thoughts. Anyone? You can just like, Victor. Sorry.
you want our final thoughts?
Yes.
No. I just want to say it's wonderful to be here. Also, as I say, as the Dutch representative. We're looking forward to cooperating the coming year on a subject that we think is important, circularity, which is a little bit neutral because it's like material focused, but it is also like value driven, because why do we take care of the planet? Because we want to leave it in a better way for our parents and our grandparents. So it's just great, and I think it's great that the Business of Design Week is happening again live. And we're honored and happy to be here. So
we're just as glad, M+ is so happy to finally allow this to be host.
Yes, and it's a wonderful museum, by the way. So and I visited your
the galleries.
Visit the galleries, and it's impressive. So.
Thank you. All teamwork, but yes, it's a 10-year journey. but yes, final thoughts would be great. Yep.
For me, I mean, Business of Design Week is the business bit, which is the really fantastic part of this event. And, design is for business. And it's the unique event in the world. And it's great that we're talking to a much wider audience as designers. And we're really spreading the word. And the more people that can understand that creativity and design can make a difference, then the world's going to be a better place.
Yeah.
No, you can give a complete, you're welcome to give a skeptical
rainbow.
No. It could be thunder and lightning, it's fine if you would like to.
No, I'm really happy to be here. And I feel it also in every encounter, that people are really happy to see each other again. And to, for us, it's really important to be here in M+, because we worked so hard on it. And now we can see how it's functioning, how it works, how it brings people together. So, happy, happy, happy.
Yeah, normally we would do a group hug now, but
So yes, it's a really kind of a pleasure for us, and thank you again, for those who remained all the way until now. But I think these conversations really, I think if there is anything idea about design for change from BODW 2022, is to know that it's not going to be independent. I mean, design itself, it cannot change without our own mindset, our own humility, our own courage to be able to bring about any sort of change, or even a kind of like being able to be curious and observant about what is the change that's happening there that I could reflect, that I could respond to. I think that's something almost intangible, but also a huge challenge, and not something that we have to be more reflective about what this change is that we want to bring about, and not just to kind of jump on the bandwagon. I think that's, to me, from all the discussions, it seems to be a lot more of that sort of like reflection. Yeah, so thank you again, for being here, and thank you, and thank you again, BODW, for organizing this. Congratulations to the team. So yes, thank you.